Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So a lot of poetry can be surprising and playful and maybe move into zones that I think people who aren't in the world of poetry expect. And I think that's a lot of what I get out of reading Kinky by Denise Duhamel. So the concept of this book is that every poem is in some way about Barbie. A lot of them are actually from Barbie's point of view. And so through this lens of a childhood toy, she gets at a lot of humor and a lot of sort of strange things about Barbie herself. But she also gets into a lot of deeper issues that affect women in general. So I think some of the controversy around Barbie in general certainly works its way into this book. And it's interesting to explore those ideas through Barbie's point of view. So what I really like about this book is that it plays. I mean, it's playing with the concept that it's working with, it's playing with the language. It doesn't take itself too seriously. And in that way, when it does hit on those more serious moments and talks about sort of societal issues, I think it feels more genuine. So starting this collection, I was immediately struck by the first poem in this book. I thought it was super interesting and it made me want to keep going, so I want to read that poem now. So the book is split into 4 sections: lipstick, powder blush, mascara, and eyeshadow. And the first poem of the collection, which is the first poem in lipstick, is called Differently Abled Barbies. In Chicago, a Barbie loses her arm. Only the boy next door knows he has taken it to use as a toothpick. A little girl refuses to throw that Barbie away and knots her doll's right sleeve that hangs limp like a sail on a breezeless day. Another Barbie in Seattle has a run-in with a German Shepherd who leaves her face as scarred as Marla Hansen's. It would be easy for a child to cry for another doll, but this girl suffers from bouts of eczema on her forehead. She knows Barbie is still the same underneath. In Baton Rouge, Barbie's hand melts into a fingerless fist, a knob, when someone leaves her on top of a stove. In Missoula, Montana, a baby sister cuts off most of Barbie's hair, not realizing it won't grow back. Creative mothers invent slings and casts, flattering hats, our impulse to destroy what is whole, to coddle and love what we have injured. Yeah, so this poem is cataloging some of the many ways a Barbie can become injured, and I just love the final note it ends on. You know, a lot of the poem seems sort of playful and, you know, it makes you think of your own childhood. You don't take it so seriously because, you know, Barbie's not a person, she's a toy and she's getting hurt. And it's interesting sort of the note she ends on, and I think the pattern in this book is as you advance through the sections and you keep going forward, Barbie kind of becomes more and more humanized. And of course, a lot of the poems are in Barbie's head from her perspective, but we see her sense of self develop over the course of the book. So something else I like about this book, and I really appreciate it because I don't feel like it's one of my skills, is the way she titles her poems. I mean, she seems to just be having a lot of fun with making the titles, and they're entertaining, and you see the title and you want to see what's in the poem. For instance, one of them is titled Barbie, her identity as an extraterrestrial finally suspected, bravely battles the interrogation of the Pentagon task force who's captured her. So like a really long poem title like that, I think gives you a lot of room to work with, and I think it's pretty funny. And then she'll have like series of poems with similar styles. Like in the first section, she has Oriental Barbie, Black Barbie history, Hispanic Barbie, Native American Barbie, right? So the titles alone, without even looking at the poems, are willing to play. And I think that's something you can really appreciate about a lot of modern poetry, is that it doesn't take itself too seriously, which I think is definitely one of the misconceptions for people who aren't quite into poetry and don't know as much about what modern poets are writing. It's that it's not the serious kind of stuff you might have read in high school. There's a lot more room for play and a lot more variety. And there's a lot of poetry out there like this that's just really entertaining. So speaking through Barbie's voice, we obviously get a lot of stuff that is toy specific, and then that becomes metaphors for womanhood in general, I think. One thing Barbie struggles with is that she's clearly thinking and has thought happening, but she has no autonomy with her body. She can't move unless a child is playing with her. And that comes up a lot in the poem. Her relationship with Ken comes up a lot because they seem to be paired together a lot, and she doesn't fully understand or feel that connected to Ken. And Barbie is inherently sexless, which something that she reckons with and tries to deal with over the course of the poems. So seeing everything through the toy's eyes, in a Toy Story kind of way, allows for Denise Duhamel to make some really interesting connections between a toy's life and a woman's life. So closer to the end of the book, there's a series of 3 poems about Barbie going to therapy. So I found those really interesting. They're some of my favorites in the collection. And I wanted to read the first in that series, Barbie in Therapy. During the first visit, Dr. Midge asks Barbie to relax and talk a little bit about her past. But Barbie, the quintessential people pleaser, doesn't know how to do anything but smile. She's afraid to tell Dr. Midge about the violence of where she's come from. So many rolling heads, just like her own, tumbling down a factory conveyor belt. Her first pain was her hair being sewn with a needle onto her bald scalp. She never had time for any kind of childhood. Not quite an orphan, yet not quite part of a family. Barbie finds she's been given so little vocabulary to talk about her feelings. Try, coaxes Dr. Midge, tapping her pen on the pad. I feel frustrated, Barbie finally says, bursting into what would be sobs if she possessed tear glands. What do I wear to therapy? Barbie wants to know. Dr. Midge recognizes her client's question as avoidance, but answers anyway, believing in not pushing too fast. Sweatpants are good, Dr. Midge says, or anything loose so you can feel comfortable lying on the couch. Dr. Midge asks Barbie to draw a picture of herself to use as a springboard, something for them to talk about. Barbie renders herself perfectly, just as she appears on the packaging she comes in. Dr. Midge is thrown. She's used to having anorectics draw themselves as blobs, or the heavier women scratching out little stick figures. You're quite an artist, Dr. Midge praises, double-checking to see if Barbie has included all her limbs. I have a little palette at home, Barbie says. It came with an easel, smock, and beret. Really? Asks Dr. Midge, interested. Barbie answers, dejected. Yes, but there's no real paint, so what's the point? That must make you angry, coaxes Dr. Midge. No real food in your fridge. No real hay for your Palomino's western stable. Barbie asks her shrink to explain what anger is, and Dr. Midge suggests several good books. She gives Barbie therapy homework, asking her to punch her pillows every night before she goes to bed. Barbie writes out her first check, hoping that just around the corner, she'll get to the real issues, which are full and fleshy and anything but plastic. So there's a lot of really funny, interesting moments in this introduction to the concept of a Barbie doll attending therapy. In the other poems in this little series, things obviously get more serious. But I really love sort of the reference to the factory where they make Barbies, and this concept of not having real paint because it's just props for a doll. So I think that one gives you a really good sense of the tone of the poems that are from Barbie's point of view. It's really interesting, really entertaining to read. So there's a lot of humor in this collection overall, which is really impressive. I think humor, when people can do it in writing, it always impresses me because I think that's a difficult thing to do and it's not easy for me to do. So yeah, there's a lot of humor, and something that she does some is that, like the poem I just read was a really long one, and then she'll have really short poems that have a bit more of like a punchline structure. Like you can see, like that's a really small poem, and then there'll be ones that go on for a couple pages. So it's like when we're talking about like pace within a poem, I can see that she's controlling pace throughout the whole collection. The whole thing works together as a piece. So when you have a shorter poem with some longer poems and it's mixing it up, it makes it so easy to read. I went through it so quickly and felt like, oh, I need to just read the whole thing again. And I like that it's a collection that doesn't feel like just all the poems someone's written in the past year. They're together for a reason. They're under the umbrella of this concept, and I think there are common themes and sort of this like structural stuff I've been thinking about that make these poems work together in such a way that they don't stand on their own, which for a collection that has a concept like this, I think makes a lot of sense. I also think it's really interesting in this book how you can see Barbie change through the 4 sections of this. She becomes more aware of what her problems are. She develops that language to talk about her feelings, which she mentioned in the therapy poem that she didn't have the language for her feelings. She changes and becomes more and more complicated as we near the end of the book. So I think it's interesting that there is something of a character arc, there's kind of a narrative development, but taking those elements and adapting it to poetry, which the work I'm working on right now has some sort of narrative connections over the whole collection. So it's really interesting to read something that does that in a very different way, in a way that's pretty unexpected. I mean, Barbie becomes more alive and rebellious, but it's a subtle shift in her. We see the poems grow more and more complicated as Barbie grows more complicated, and we get deeper and deeper into her point of view as we move through the collection. Okay, so to wrap up, this is a really interesting collection. It is fun, it is funny, it's entertaining, but it's got some really solid, relevant social commentary in it as well. And I like poetry collections that have this like uniting concept, that are not just a collection of poems where it's hard to see exactly what holds them together. I like something with a really clear concept like this. So looking back at some of the other poetry I've talked about in the past month or so with Maurice Manning and Joelle McSweeney and now Denise Duhamel, I think we can see that poetry comes in so many different shapes and sizes. The styles and the forms are very different. Their subject matter is very different. Their tones very different. There is an infinite amount of variety in modern poetry, which I think not everybody gets to see that side of it. So I can assure you that if you're not sure about poetry in general, there is something out there that you will like, because there's so much going on. There's so many different writers working with small presses and creating really interesting, unique work. It's really just a matter of finding it, which I've really loved in getting to know poetry and the way it works nowadays, is that so much of it is about discovery and finding these people that you connect with. I mean, there really is something out there for everyone. All right, that's all I have for this video. See you next time.